So Republicans have a new racist dog whistle, and it's called the "She's Not Qualified" dog whistle. Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democrat who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. If you share my concerns, maybe you could like this video, subscribe to this channel, maybe even click that little bell that will notify you when I post something new. So as a white, straight male, I had the privilege of growing up in a society that basically gave me every benefit that you could imagine. I grew up in an educated, middle-class household, went to good schools, and even though I perceived myself as being a progressive person, I really had very little understanding of the reality that Black people and other oppressed groups have to face in American society. The first exposure I really had to that, actually, was when I was in college. At the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, I got very involved in student government. And there I met Black people and gay people who were activists in their community. These people were kind enough to give me an education as to the discrimination and violence and inequities that they had to face in their daily lives simply because of who they were, things that they couldn't change. During that time, I became firmly committed to the idea that we needed to address the inequities that so many Americans who are not, like me, white, male, straight, have to face in society. But even with that, truth be told, it was hard for me to imagine the fear that most Black men have to face when they're confronted by police officers. Again, it was just something completely outside of my experience. As a teenager, I got pulled over by police officers, I have to admit it. Wasn't a particularly pleasant experience, but they kind of gave me a slap on the wrist, a ticket, and sent me on my way. I never had to fear for my life when I was stopped. I always knew that I could talk to these officers one-on-one without fear that they were going to pull out their gun and suddenly arrest me without any real pretext. And as a result, it was hard for me to imagine that there are people in our country who experience that. Of course, thanks to everybody having a very good video camera in their pocket in the form of their cell phone, now I am certainly aware of the fact that when Black people say they live in fear of the police when they get stopped, I can certainly understand why. So that gives you a little bit of background on my own kind of growth in understanding of the racism that exists in our society. I certainly still have a lot to learn, and I'm certainly not claiming to be an expert, but at least I'm doing my best to kind of understand what others are dealing with and their experiences as they go through society. Unfortunately, it appears that there are certain people who don't want to make the kind of effort that I have to understand the experiences that others have. Rather than understanding that their life is enriched by meeting people who are different from them, they try to cling to people who are just like them, fearful that being exposed to others who are unlike them might expose their own mediocrity. Indeed, I love this attitude that we hear from so many on the right, that so-and-so is not qualified for a position, when we've been promoting unqualified, mediocre, white men to positions of power for centuries. I mean, Donald Trump himself is the ultimate example of that. In what world would a Black Donald Trump have reached the level that he did? I mean, the only Black person who has ever reached the presidency is probably one of the most impressive individuals in our country's history. I mean, whatever you say about Barack Obama, the gentleman is brilliant, having been the editor-in-chief of the Harvard Law Review. In fact, the first Black editor-in-chief of the Harvard Law Review. Whether you agree with him or disagree with him, I think it'd be hard to say that he's not a brilliant and very impressive person. As is his wife, Michelle, by the way. Quite the contrast with Donald Trump, isn't he? But that's the point. That mediocre white straight men get promoted to positions of power, while for a woman or a Black person or a member of the LGBTQ community, they need to be so overqualified that there's absolutely no denying them that position. That's kind of the position we find ourselves in right now. Of course, we're all aware of the criticism that the MAGA crowd have been leveling against Biden's desire to appoint a Black woman to the Supreme Court. They're claiming that it's an affirmative action hire, as if affirmative action is a bad thing. But the truth of the matter is, we've already been having affirmative action hires. The problem is, it's been affirmative action for white straight men, just for nobody else. As I explained to my cousin once, affirmative action is basically what forces people like me, white straight men who've had all the opportunities that society can grant us, it forces us to look outside of the circle of people we'd normally be dealing with, to find other people who are qualified for positions, as well as people who look like us. And that's the irony. We've had all these white straight males sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court. Now we've got a couple of white females. But with black females, we've never had a single one. And as the Washington Post pointed out, there are so many qualified black female candidates for this position that it's like an embarrassment of riches. Leading the pack right now is Ketanji Brown Jackson, a circuit court judge from D.C. who previously spent 8 years as a district court judge, and prior to that handled appeals cases for a public defender's office, exactly the kind of case that could end up before the Supreme Court. She has a law degree from Harvard, having graduated with honors and having served on the Harvard Law Review, and she also worked as a reporter for Time magazine, as well as having clerked for Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer. This is somebody who is supremely qualified for the position of Supreme Court Justice. Certainly she's far more qualified than Amy Coney Barrett, who the MAGA crowd loved, who Donald Trump appointed because he said he was going to appoint a woman to the bench. We didn't hear any claims of some type of affirmative action hire there. And this given the fact that Amy Coney Barrett basically never worked as an appellate attorney and spent only 2 years as a judge before appointment to the Supreme Court. Now, granted, she has a long and distinguished academic career at Notre Dame Law School, and far be it from me to cast aspersions at someone who's a professor, but I don't see how you can claim that Amy Coney Barrett was qualified and was not an affirmative action hire while saying that Ketanji Brown Jackson isn't qualified. Somehow it just doesn't add up. Well, if you think this was just a one-time thing because of the Supreme Court, well, you were wrong. Now we hear from that same MAGA crowd that Lisa Cook, who President Biden is nominating to serve on the Federal Reserve Board, is not qualified as well. As it turns out, Lisa Cook is an extremely respected economist, a professor at one of the fine universities here in my home state of Michigan, at Michigan State University. She's well known for her research on how Fed policy can impact inequality, particularly racial inequality. And that's not necessarily a moot point, given the fact that the Fed is who sets economic policy here in the United States. And even now, we have a large gap in the employment and the wealth statistics between white people and black people. And it makes you wonder, if this agency had perhaps some black people serving on it, maybe they might have paid more attention to this issue, don't you think? Well, my guess is that's exactly what the white MAGA crowd are concerned about, and why they're arguing that she's unqualified. Now, just to take one moment here to prove that she is qualified, by the way, I would like to point out that the current Fed chair, Jerome Powell, a Republican, who everybody loves, and everybody agrees is qualified, is not an economist. He's a lawyer. And again, far be it from me to cast aspersions at lawyers, given that I'm a lawyer and a college professor, of course. But I would argue that to be on the policy-making body that sets economic policy, one would probably like to have an economist, right? And she's just not any economist to boot. She's actually worked in the White House. So she has extensive experience in government. And among economists, her appointment has been praised. So what's the deal with this recurring theme of not qualified? Well, what we're seeing again is just one more example of dog whistle politics on the part of Republicans. These politics go way back, but really the genesis of them came under Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon embarked on a Southern strategy, highlighting issues that were supposedly not racially based, like housing and crime. In so doing, he understood that he was appealing to the prejudices of white people without specifically mentioning race. Ronald Reagan, of course, was the master of that. I mean, we have to remember his story about the black welfare queen, which of course was completely made up, and his own focus on the racist drug war. And then you have George H.W. Bush with Willie Horton talking about how Mike Dukakis was letting murderers back out on the street. And isn't it funny? It just so happened that the person they were pointing to is black. No, the reality is in each of these cases, these were racist attacks by the Republicans against the Democrats to win power, but they did it in a way in which they didn't explicitly mention race. Ironically, that's the thing that makes Donald Trump different and why his supporters love him so much. He's not afraid to explicitly mention race. He makes no bones about the fact that he's a racist and loves it. But there are still a lot of Republicans who might not be comfortable with that and who are afraid that that type of open racism turns off a certain percentage of moderate voters. Voters who still can be appealed to on their racist instincts by using coded language, like talking about crime or housing or the drug war. Well, that's exactly what we're seeing right now with this not qualified argument. Affirmative action has been a long target of the white MAGA crowd because, of course, they don't like the fact that black people who are qualified might get the same chance at power as unqualified white men. Such people might actually be concerned about how policy impacts black women, for example. But they can't explicitly say, oh, we're not going to support her because she's black, or oh, we're not going to support her because she's a woman. Instead, they use the term unqualified. It doesn't matter that she's really well qualified, whether it be Ketanji Brown Jackson or Lisa Cook, because this is not an argument over facts. This is an explicit appeal to mediocre white people who want to retain their position of privilege simply by virtue of the color of their skin. When they hear not qualified, they know what they're talking about. And so we as Democrats need to call a spade and point out when they're using this kind of coded language that this is not some legitimate policy disagreement. This is just an effort to appeal to the racism of closed-minded white people. Well, if you like this video, maybe you could check out this video as well, where I talk about Amy Coney Barrett's nomination. It's a sad state of affairs that she's on the Supreme Court now, but hey, we're stuck with her. And the best we can do now is be thankful that President Biden is appointing some people who can stand up to her. I'll see you then, and in the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.